I'm so pleased that you all come here tonight. What we're going to do is run through the work of the study committee and have an opportunity for you to ask questions. We'll have discussion. What we'll do is we'll run through a PowerPoint presentation, and you'll see, some details that maybe you want to get back to, so perhaps jot a note down, or if you want to interrupt midway, that's fine too. We want this to be a discussion, but what we'll do is we'll run through the presentation. We'll do some question and answers, so you can ask your questions. We'll discuss. My guess is that some of the questions that we've been hearing are common, so we'll do the common ones. If I'm picking up a need for us to break out by town, we'll have that opportunity also. We would do that at the end, because some of the issues that might be of interest in St. George might be different from Williston and so forth. But what we'll try to do first is do as much together so that we're all hearing the same thing at the same time. Okay? I'm Colleen McKinnon. I'm a Heinsberg board member and CSSU board member. I'm the chair of our CSSU Act 46 study committee, and like to introduce other committee members and our administrators that have been supporting our work. So working in the door, we have Karen Macklad and Jean McHugh, both from Williston, CVU and Williston K-8 boards. Working this side around the computer, we have Dave Connery from Shelburne, and Jean from Williston, and we'll just go down the line. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, Tim Williams from the Shelburne board.
Russ Caffrey from Shelburne.
Kevin Mara from Williston.
Keith Roberts from Heinsberg.
Kelly Bowen from St. George.
Eric Beal, Charlotte.
Mark McDermott, Charlotte.
Elaine Pinckney, Superintendent.
Bob Mason, Chittenden South.
And we have Sandy Raymond, who is our Superintendent's Administrative Assistant. She's been helping us keep everything together. And Megan Roy has also been on our committee and helping us work things out. So the Act 46 Study Committee, it started at the end of the fall, or the end of September, and we gave ourselves a very accelerated timeline. Again, you can see our committee members. This PowerPoint presentation will be made available, so you can go back and find it. You'll see that there's representation based on town and so forth. The report will also be made available, full report. So the Act 46 study, the state goals are equity, quality, efficiencies. You've probably heard about this throughout the state. Our population, we've gone from a high of around 110,000 students in the state. We're down to about 73,000. The state is seeing a need to consider our school governance in different ways. And so Act 46 provides some incentives for communities to come together and consider different ways of operating our schools. And so part of our work was to look at school governance in Chittenden South Supervisory Union and consider whether or not we wanted to advance with trying to make particular deadlines that the legislation had set out. And we decided that because of the significant impact of the incentives for our budgets and so forth, we decided to go for an accelerated merger agenda, which would have us going to vote by July 1st, 2016. Obviously, it's coming up rather quickly. Our other options were to go for a conventional merger, giving us another year, but we felt it was worth putting the energy into making sure that we had as much information for the community as possible prior to going to vote, but trying to really get this before the community now. And if we didn't have a positive vote by 2016, we would be probably coming back and go back to the community before 2017. Alternative structures, the state is looking for you can go online, you can read the legislation, but the state's looking for school districts governance with more than 900 students. And do nothing, I would say, is really not necessarily an option because the Secretary of Education has to go to the State Board of Education with a report and list of recommendations for school governance that's sustainable by 2018. So we were just reading the tea leaves and thought if we don't come up with what makes sense for us now, it might be decided for us in the future. That's not a given, but that was our assumption is let's see what we have in place now. Next slide. So this slide here shows the status of study committees and mergers that are happening. We're one of the purple ones. We're going for a June vote. The yellow, I don't know if you can read it, but the yellow are active study committees that are considering different elements. And successful votes, we see the red. So we're in good company. There are 9 mergers that have been approved so far prior to June 30th of 2016. There are probably 5 or 6 others, including us, that are going to go forward for a vote. Are there questions on this slide? Okay. So part of the incentive, where we really saw that there was a need to do what we can to get information out to the community, there are a couple of pieces that we want to emphasize. One is this is the 3rd major study that we've had in Chittenden South Supervisory Union related to our study committee, related to our school governance. We had a study in 2008, we did another one in 2011. We felt that things had changed enough now that it was really important to push as much as we could to meet our deadlines, to bring this to the community. So it's building on work that we've already done. The prior studies that we've done have really given us some information related to how we can share our services across the supervisory union in better ways to take care of efficiencies, provide better education and so forth. And so we're really building on prior work within the SU. This feels like a natural progression in many ways. The study grant of $20,000 was made available for those communities who were going for an accelerated merger, which is a vote this year prior to July 1, 2016. That goes for legal counsel and consultant, which we've taken advantage of. If we have a positive vote, there's up to a $150,000 transition grant that can support it, and that's minus the $20,000. If we have a positive vote from all of our communities, there's a 5-year tax incentive that gets progressively reduced over the 5 years, but starts with 10 cents, 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2 cents. 6 year out, it levels across the state. And if we need to go for another year, or if St. George, for example, did not join, chose to remain independent, which we wouldn't expect, but because the benefit to St. George, you'll see more of that later. But 4 years, 8642. So because of the financial impact and because of the educational impact, we felt it was important to continue with moving this study forward. And so since the end of September, we've had probably 35 meetings with our committee, full study committees and subcommittees, and it resulted in about a 50-page report that's gone before the Agency of Ed, available online, and we're going to go through some other elements of the report going forward. Next slide. So before we started, we wanted to come up with our shared values, and we identified among all of our board members and administrators on the committee, and we could say that this is echoed throughout all the board members, not even those just on the committee, but we see this across the supervisory union. We want to use policy to ensure equity, efficiencies, flexibility. We want to provide programs that communities are willing to support. We want to make sure that what we're putting out there for our educational programs are things that people really care about. Transparency, we hear that a lot in communities. We want to make sure that whatever we're putting forward with policies and budgets or any kind of rules that affect people within our communities, whether it's kids, faculty, staff, community members, we want to make sure that we're as transparent as possible. And we want to clarify the roles of stakeholders. That's something that we continuously work on as board members, is how do we clarify the role of a board versus administrator, and so forth. So we continuously work on that dynamic. And we know that going forward with a consolidated board, you'll see our recommendations for numbers, but right now we have 34 board members. We would not have 34 board members in a consolidated board. It would be smaller, and because it would be one board, we know that we need to use policy significantly and to ensure outcomes and so forth. So we want to make sure that our board members going forward have adequate training and as much training as possible related to using a policy governance model, which essentially just means policy drives decision-making, and how do you have accountability factors to make sure that you're getting the right information. So these are our shared values, and the next slide is Dave, who's going to give you another voice to listen to for a little bit.
Okay. Hello, my name is Dave Connery. I'm happy to be here to talk to all of you about Act 46. The first slide here is going to touch on what's the current system that we have here in CSSU. We currently have the 5 towns, Charlotte, Heinsberg, Charlotte, Williston, not Charlotte twice, St. George, and Heinsberg. But we also have this unified school district called Champlain Valley School District. So in that system, we have 1 superintendent, 7 school boards, and 34 board members. There's a school board for each individual school district, and then also the CSSU board over above that, which oversees the shared services, and that is contained, that is a 17-member board that has members of the other boards on it. There's not separately elected members of the CSSU board, so 3 members from Shelburne are on the CSSU board and so forth. Currently, the supervisory union contains 6 large school buildings, has about 4,000 students, 900 employees, and our combined individual budgets are over $7 million. If we look at CSSU enrollment, going from the left at 2009 out to 2015 on the right, and then the current projection for 2025 all the way out, that's a 2015 projection of what 2025 will look like. You look at the totals of 4220 back about 7 years ago, and we're looking right now at 3941. We're seeing a gradual trend downward with a little bit of differences from town to town on how things go, but no real drastic changes overall in our enrollment. So what would the governance or the board look like for a new Act 46 system? The necessary districts in order to form would be Charlotte, Heinsberg, Shelburne, Williston, and CVU. An advisory district in this system is a district that doesn't necessarily have to vote yes in order for the district to move forward. But in this case, it would be highly beneficial for St. George and for the overall district if St. George came through. The grades of operation would be from pre-K all the way to 12 as one district. We would have one board with proportional representation, which we'll get to on the next slide. One budget adjusted for local property rates, property values, and all property, meaning all buildings and assets, would transfer to this new district. So what would the Champlain Valley School District Board look like? Well, based on the 2010 census and a decision that we would have a 12-member board by the committee, the representation plays out like this. Williston with 4, Shelburne with 3, Heinsberg and Charlotte each with 2, and St. George with 1 vote. If St. George chooses not to join, we would have an 11-member board with everything but this line right here. So one of the issues that comes up a lot with combining the school districts into one, how do I keep my local voice? Well, local voices will still be involved in the budget development process at each individual building. Use of local advisories for principals and boards. So, for example, facilities. If a principal or a building has an issue with a roof or something and needs a capital improvement, this type of thing gets flowed up into the budget process, gets into a capital plan, say, and then all the the needs in the budgets are allocated based on priorities per se and how much money is available within the overall budget. All steps that would happen before any other steps would be taken. But there's issues that can come up. I used facilities, but it could be, say, central computing resources or things like that. All of those things will have a way to flow up needs through the principals to the boards and into the decision-making process. We're going to adopt a plan for coordinated communications so that everyone in each individual district has the same information, which ties in with annual mechanics for local budgets. Currently, we have a system called the Budget Buddy system where each individual board has some citizens come in. It can be, we use local citizens, members of staff, teachers, paras and teachers, staff, principals. Am I leaving out any? But all those things are inputs that would come into the budget process that would stay the same, where folks from individual towns would still have that. If you look at what's under shared governance right now, 2/3 of the 70 million budgets are in sort of centralized, consolidated, CSSU-wide coordination. Things like special education, transportation, and things like that, and many other examples. The line I always like to use when people are talking about, if people are nervous about combining things and having Heinsberg and Charlotte and Shelburne all together, right now we have 1/3 of our students are in a combined school district that come from each one of the towns, and that's CVU. And that's an example that works really well for us, and we hope to, the committee would hope to build on that with a consolidated district, from K to 8 as well. So I think that's my last slide. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So up next is Jean Jensen. She's going to talk about financials.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
I'm Jean Jensen from Williston. I've been on the CVU board for 13 years until a month ago. I've been the chair of CVU and the chair of CSSU, so I have a little experience in this. They always let me do the numbers because they love me and nobody else wants to. But before I just jump into the numbers, to follow on to what Colleen and Dave were saying, this is really not about the money for this committee. It's really about the education of our children. I'm going to take you through the numbers. It's 4 slides because it is important to taxpayers. It's important to the community. But if it was just about the tax incentive, I don't think we would have had a unanimous positive vote on our committee, because it's really because we believe it's the right thing to do for kids' education. So with that, though, and because I love numbers, we're going to talk about the financials. So there's really 4 important things. The first 4 on here, kind of key components of the financials. There would be, as mentioned, a single budget. There's a blended tax rate. I'm going to come back to some of these. Financial efficiencies in consolidation. There's the issues with assets and liabilities, and when you put all those things into the big blender, it comes out that there'll be tax implications by town. So just to go a little more slowly, the single budget based on equity and affordability, right now we have 7 budgets. We're going to 1 budget. It would be, as Colleen mentioned, the values are really about equity. So we'd be building those budgets based on policy and equity. And affordability is going to be super important because of the second bullet, which is that there'll be one blended tax rate across all 5 towns. So it has to be something that all 5 towns can support as a group. Kind of like the CVU budget is now, you know, it goes across all the towns. This will be going to all the towns. Everyone knows CLA is, it's just, the CLA is how the state makes sure that all the towns are assessing their properties equitably. But aside from that, everyone will see the same tax rate with this adjustment for assessments. I'm going to come back to financial efficiencies and assets and liabilities because kind of we're talking about tax rates and I want to just keep going on tax implications. There's a model that was developed by well, it was
Management Council,
okay, and that was the state or the VSBA.
through the VSBA.
Okay, so there's one model that's being used by everybody in the state to model the tax implications of this merged or non-merged situations. And when we ran it for ours, it basically says, given a set of assumptions, what would your tax rate be for each town if you don't merge? What would your tax rate be if you do merge? Everything else held equal, just that change, merge or not merge, what would it look like? And it takes into account, well, just to, sorry, I was reading my notes, so I don't want to skip anything. Just a little bit of a primer. Our state taxes, we have a statewide tax rate in Vermont that's adjusted by town, and it's based on your cost per pupil. So just thinking about that, we'll go to the next slide. So the next one here, this is like, so spending per equalized pupil is what your tax rate by town is based on. You can see a couple of them, a couple of years worth of here. If you had the time to sit here and study it because you love numbers like I do, you'd say, oh, I can see a couple of things are, you see enrollment and then cost per pupil. Okay, so our smaller schools have higher cost per pupil. That kind of makes sense. You still need a principal, you still need a building. Our bigger schools, a little more, we get CVUs, kind of different, but it's a high school. You could also look at it and say, well, you know, enrollment's going down. Maybe some schools aren't taking money out of the system as fast. What you can't see by just looking at the numbers, though, is that we do have one situation or issue that I'm going to have to come back to, which is that what you don't see here is that some of our communities have invested in facilities more aggressively than others. That's just in the spending. It doesn't jump out at you. It's probably a bigger factor than actually the size of the school, which was kind of news to all of us. But to the point that we're all looking at cost per pupil, this is where we're starting with the model. And so you notice they're all different. And then we're going to jump to the model in a sec. There's 2 things that affect the tax rate from this point on, given that we have common assumptions. One is the incentive that Colleen mentioned. So it starts with, right off the bat, 2018, you get a 10-cent incentive off your tax rate. Tax rate goes down 10 cents. That's the one that goes 10, 8, 6, goes away. So right off the bat, all the communities get that benefit. The other piece of it, though, is that because we're going from 5 tax rates to 1, it's basically what we're calling a blended tax rate. So it's kind of like a weighted average. So you guys, people who are good at math would say, well, what's the weighted average in here? And it turns out that it's kind of close to Heinsberg's number. But so what we're going to see is, since you're going to a weighted average, towns that have low cost per pupil now are going to be, the blended number is going to be a bit of a hurt. People who have highs now are going to get the benefit. So there's going to be a little bit, so there's 2 things going on again. The incentive, which is good for everybody, and then this blended, which is a good and a bad. And go to the next one. We're just testing out this slide. You can tell me later if it works. So here's our 4 towns. This is the cumulative tax savings for $1,000 of assessed value. So you multiply this times 3 if you had a $300,000 house. Here's 0 in here. So this would be a savings chart. And you can see, so Charlotte has a big benefit because they get the benefit of the incentive and they get the benefit of the blended rate is a help to them. Williston and Shelburne get the tax incentive, but the blended rate is a hurt to them. But the important thing on this slide is that for these 5 years, and this is 2018 to 2022, so we're talking pretty far out, everybody gets a benefit. Nobody cumulatively does not get a tax benefit. So, but like I said, some of these, the numbers are relatively small except for Charlotte. It's really probably not a deciding factor for most people that they're going to get $70 times, 300,000, So it's a way to say that it's neutral to better, but probably for most towns, this is not going to be the deciding factor. It's going to be more about kids. Just to hear the assumptions we put in here was we looked at that chart that Dave showed with the kids, number of kids, and projected that out a little bit declining, and some sort of a historical impact in education spending going up. I could show you the actual tax numbers that are in the model, and they'll be in the report if you want to see it. But the only thing I can say about those actual tax numbers is that I can guarantee those will not be the actual tax numbers, right? So what's really different is the difference between the two. One thing to keep in mind is, Colleen, you said there's 60 districts or something that have already combined? Is that what you said? 40? All those 40 districts are getting that 10-cent incentive in 2018, which comes out of our taxes. So right off the bat, the taxes are going to be different than what we assumed. So I'm going to show you one other case, and then I'm almost done. I mentioned before that one of the reasons that some of our cost per pupil is different between towns is that some towns have invested in facilities more regularly than others. We know Shelburne just had a significant bond passed in November, right? Yep. That's not in any of these numbers because we started these numbers baseline earlier. There's also some significant conversations going on in Williston. Now there's a chance that both of those will, Shelburne's is already in the wood, chance that Williston may already have some kind of a bond before this all goes into effect. And so we said, well, to be fair, we really should try to roll those bonds into the numbers just to see what will happen. So let's see if we play a little guessing game. What do you think is going to happen? So Williston's got an issue where they either pay for their bond all by themselves or they pay for it over the 4 towns. Shelburne will either pay for it by themselves or pay for it over the 4 towns. And look at that. Williston and Shelburne get difference between those two. You merged, not merged. Well, this gets a little bit more beneficial for Williston and Shelburne, a little less beneficial for Heinsberg and Charlotte because they're now helping to pay for those bonds. But again, it's still everybody through 2022 is getting an improved tax rate on the merged thing. I just want to mention that we picked Shelburne and Williston because their projects are pretty advanced. It doesn't mean that Heinsberg and Charlotte won't have projects coming up. So it's a little unfair, but but since we just didn't want people to vote for it on a set of assumptions and then go, wait a minute, you didn't tell me that Williston was going to have a bond. So now it's all up in the air. We have these 2 things. So I think finally, just back to the 2 I skipped over before. That's the tax rate issue. There were just two other issues in here. One is financial efficiencies. The state, of course, is hoping for huge financial efficiencies. CSSU, we've been working together as a team for so long that we've already realized a lot of those efficiencies that other communities have not. And so we've put $1.5 million over 5 years, very conservative, $300,000 on a $70 million budget. It's made up really of 2 buckets, some stuff that's really obvious, like we won't need to do 5 different audits, 5 different audits. We can do 1 audit, so we pay for 1 audit. So there's some things like that that are kind of small money, but they're definitely, I can point to them. And then there's some other things that say, well, if we had 1 board, we could do a better job of consolidating contracts or some things like that. So we have sort of a list of things that we could be more efficient at, but we're not going to say $25 here and $35 here, but more of a feel for it. This is in line with what some other towns are pointing to, so we're pretty confident of that. Again, it's not in the model, and it's very small. You wouldn't see it anyway, but there is some savings. And frankly, most of the boards have been working so hard to keep their taxes down in the last 4 or 5 years that, even this looks pretty good to us, but it is there, something there. And the last one just to touch on is this whole assets and liabilities. All the assets and liabilities are going to go on to become owned by this new district. So Williston will no longer own the Williston, well, they don't. The Williston School District won't be there to own the Williston School. It'll all be owned by this one solid district. We did some analysis just to make sure that there was no town who was going to be disadvantaged in that, and we really didn't find any significant change. The value of an asset of the value of a school, since we have no intention of selling, or we couldn't, get out of any school, what does it really matter what the asset of the school is? But we did the work just to make sure that everything was fair, and there was no town that was significantly out of stretch with the others. It all kind of fell into a reasonable thing. So I think that was all the money questions. We'll come back.
Could we just say one more thing
Yeah.
about the merged districts? And you look at the model and it projects changes over time, but at the same time, districts are consolidating around the state, and so the overall cost of education will go down around the state. And so there's aspects of this which will continue to come down because the education fund will require less funding because there will be more efficiencies throughout the state over the next 5 years and beyond. So that's another aspect that's not in the model, but it's a real outcome that is expected from the Act 46 legislation.
And closer to home, we didn't try to value all the resource sharing that you're going to hear about. Is that's really a big thing that we think financially will help us, so we didn't put it in the model. Just being able to share resources across, districts. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Gina, I have a question.
Yeah.
You keep saying 5 budgets down to 1, but is it really 4? Is CBU going to be part of the consolidated?
Yes, it will.
Oh, okay.
So 7 budgets. 7 budgets down to 1, because we have 5 districts, plus CVU is a district, so 5 town districts. CVU is a district, and then CSSU board oversees a shared budget for all the towns. So 7 budgets down to 1. So this slide is addressing some of the efficiencies, such as moving from 7 budgets to 1. And we think that, and we believe based on past experience with special education, for example, that when we move things to those activities that take a lot of time, cost money, when we centralize it, it saves money in the whole system. So we believe that with consolidating governance, we'll see an elimination of some redundancies across the system. And, audits, for example, it may not be a huge number, but going from 7 audits to 1 audit. Sharing of resources, we'll be better able to share resources across town lines. Right now, we have some hard lines, boundaries in the way that we work together because of the tax rates and the way the legal setup is in the state. You can't just send something across a town line. It doesn't. You got to have contracts that follow it and so forth. Educational opportunities. A network structure will allow for some innovations. Our administrators have done an excellent job of allowing for innovation across our supervisory union. The structural change will help advance that, and creative staffing opportunities. Right now, for example, if a teacher wanted to go from one town to another town, they can't do that. Let's say they wanted to go to another town to learn about a math program for a year, or learn how another town does something like, how they use one-to-one devices. A teacher can't do that without losing seniority. So this allows for some structural changes. As I noted earlier, when you centralize functions that take time and cost money, you can direct more resources to the classroom because you're not spending the money on the administrative oversight. More time for principals to focus on instructional leadership. Principals want to be able to be their instructional leaders in the classrooms with their faculty. It would allow them on the ground to be able to have walkthroughs for a building, more time to do things where they can see over the implementation of concepts that they've brought into the classrooms and that they've adopted. So we believe more time for principals to focus on the jobs that we hire them to do. We hire them to be instructional leaders. More ability, greater ability to share across town lines, material and human resources, opportunities for placement for students. Right now, if a student has a need to be in another environment, for example, we can't necessarily just move a kid across a town line. This allows for some opportunity to make that a more fluid experience for kids. And depending on what we do down the road, there may be opportunities to have some specialization in some schools, and it would be easier to move kids around. And more predictable planning long-term. When we have the slide that you saw earlier that showed enrollment and educational spending per pupil, what the takeaway from that is a larger system can absorb change easier. And so when we have a larger system, we can absorb significant changes that happen for whatever reason. It could be, a senior, you could have staff that are primarily at the senior end of their pay scale in one school district, or you could have special education needs that get targeted in one school, for example. And right now that has an impact. Those traditionally have had impacts on local budgets. When you spread it across a larger system, it's more stable, so it's more predictable. So where are we now? So our committee voted March 29th. How did we feel about it? The work that we had been doing, and we had been testing the pulse all along the way. We have unanimous support from our committee for merging governance across Chittenden South Supervisory Union. State Board of Education is going to be reviewing our set of recommendations. That's available on the website. You'll get a link to that. The yellow flyers that you have there, there's a web address on that. You can go there and you should be able to find the report. You can read that. And for those who are, after the State Board Ed reviews a report, they'll make an action. At that point, we expect them to approve it. At that point, we'll be able to warn a vote June 7th. And it's not just the vote June 7th on school consolidation. We also need to elect representatives, school board members for a consolidated board. So we're going to make sure that there's information available for those who might want to run for the board. So it's, anyone who has an interest has the opportunity. Ballots will be available from your town clerks any day. They're going to make them available before the state board acts and before the school board's warn, just in case people need to start collecting signatures. And then there'll be essentially two ballot items on June 7th. One would be a yes/no vote on school consolidation, and the other would be electing board members.
What fiscal year would this, if it passes, what fiscal year would it be?
That's a really good question. So, and we should have had a slide on this. So if this passes, there's a year of transition. All the deadlines have been, do something by July 1st. So if it's approved June 7th, the transition starts. The Secretary of Education meets with those who are elected for a consolidated board, and there's an organizational meeting. That would likely happen in July. Then that board, a consolidated board, the 12-member we anticipate, would start the work of, they would need to develop policy, come up with a plan for annual meetings, start working on the budget for the next fiscal year, and so forth. So during that period of time between July 1, 2016 and July 1, 2017, there'll be two governing bodies. One would be a new consolidated board that's gearing up to take over responsibilities. The other would be the existing boards that are in place now. They still need to run out the work of the budgets that have just been adopted and oversee policy within their local communities. Does that answer your question? So it's a year of transition before a new board would be fully operational in a new district.
Is that for all throughout the state? Is that the goal? Is that the 2017 budget year would be the year when the dollars start to place?
I'm going to flip back to the, it's like slide 2 with the states, the colored map. Yep, that one. So the ones that are red, we have successful votes before, the deadline. And those that are purple, like us, we want to try to meet the deadline to take full advantage of the tax incentives and so forth. So we're going for fully operational by July 1, 2017, and that maximizes benefits for the purple who might be successful and the red who are already successful.
But another way to look at that is there's three flavors. There's the accelerated, there's a non-accelerated or regular, and then there's do nothing. So for operational on July 1st of 2017 is the accelerated mergers, which are what we're part of and what you said red was right there. Regular mergers, which start with an 8-cent tax rate, those are operational on July 1st, 2018. The third version is folks who do nothing or are unable to do anything. Those are subject to what the Board of Education or what the Agency of Education wants to do with those districts at that time. So at that point, you've been given 2 years to make up your own mind and come to consensus on how you want to form. And in that third version, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this is me saying this, you can have it done unto you by the Agency of Education. So, I think everyone wants to act in the best interest of their town, both fiscally and take advantage of the 10 cents if it's reasonable to organize this quickly, or at least take advantage of the 8 cents in the second year and consolidate for the reason I mentioned before, where bring the overall cost down of education across the state. And I don't think anybody here wants to go out on a limb and say, I'll just wait and see what happens. There's so many cliches, the devil you know versus the devil you don't, all those things. And those are the three timelines that the law set out. So accelerated at that date, 17, 18, and then so forth. Yep. Kelly. Yeah.
I just might add, just for clarification too, to the budget process. So with the CSSU budget for the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but we are already projected out a year. So even though we will, if we vote to merge on for this July 1st, first accelerated deadline, it's an organizational year. The budget we'll still be operating on will be the CSSU budget that we've already approved and has already come before the voters. Just want to clarify that.
So this presentation will be made available on the address that you have in the yellow sheet. It's act46.org or CS, whatever it is.
CSSU.org.
Should know it.
Act46.cssu.org.
Can you repeat that, Kevin?
Act46.cssu.org.
Yeah.
But it's also available from each of your individual school districts. It should be at the top on the left-hand side.
Nice big link to click on.
Link to the Act 46.
So I just want to point out that there's a hot link to the study report if you want to pull up the full study report. I want to flip to the next one. So questions, discussion. So this is an opportunity. I think this is a small enough group. We can start out, let's get your questions now. We'll all share in responding, who feels most comfortable. If there's a need for you to talk with your individual board members who've been serving on the committee, we'll make that available as well. So what are your questions? What do you want to know?
I noticed that we're going to have 4 board members. Would that be have a perception of stacking like the board that because we have 4 and the other time have 2? So I think that's one concern that some of the citizens might ask is that, well, we the bigger school, yes, so they have more weight, so they may be they could potentially make decisions that favor certain size or certain district. Yeah. So that is one thing that there would be a perception issue.
Yes. And I'll respond to that and then I'll open that up, but I think that's an important point that we want to acknowledge.
And one is when you have one single board meeting, my concern is that even right now, individual school board meeting lasts about 2 to 3 hours a night. So so if you're going to last 8 hours, because there are whole groups of people have to go through all these issues, I'm bringing my own chair.
Good question.
Drink because I mean that would be a logistic like questions that people will ask is like, how long would the board meeting last? I mean, I'm sure that you guys have family life.
So would you like to run?
So let me just start with responding to your first question, which I think really connects with your second question quite well.
Did you want to throw it to Mark? Or?
No, I want to thank Joe for concern of my health and well-being. But so two things. Because he's from Charlotte, and this is something we discussed was the number of board members proportioned out to the towns, and it is a proportional representation of the populations among the towns. And part of one way to think about it, Joe, is actually a third of our students already go to school underneath a board that is proportionally represented already, and that's at CVU. Williston has how many board members on CVU? 4. It's the same. It's the same. It's the exact same numbers. So that's something we thought about, and it can be a perception problem, but I think it works well. And second, on the length of board meetings, yes, the board meetings will be longer, but some of us are already here for a CSSU board meeting and then a regular board meeting, plus all the attenuating other committee meetings. Some of that will be slimmed down. So yes, it will be longer probably, but I still expect you there.
So I just want to add that with a governance model like this, the boards will maybe not be in every little detail as you expect, and so what you'll see is some shifting to perhaps your principal, making sure that they're engaging the community in different ways, where I know that within our SU, there's a different culture in each board and their interactions with their local community. This is a model like this, we really have to rely on a policy, that policy and outcomes and the questions that we pose from the community are driving some of the decision making, and that at the local level there are local opportunities for engagement. So it will look a little bit like what we have now, but also a little different. Does anyone?
The only thing that I would add to what Mark said is that there are several different models for representation on the board. We talked about them, and we felt that the best model was proportional representation because that is the most legally defensible model. It is subject to the least amount of challenge. Mark pointed out we already have the CVU board that essentially operates the same way. The only other thing I would add is that it is based on the census that's conducted every 10 years. So the numbers that we have on the slide are based on the 2010 census. They're going to be reevaluated each 10 years after the census. So those numbers are not set in stone. If the towns change enough to cause the numbers to change, then that school district board would change.
I mean, the only thing that I like the board or you guys to put it on the FAQ, address that issue, because that is going to come up.
We will do that.
And that's total population on the census, not student population.
Correct. There is, one of the models was student population, and we rejected that because we felt that the total population was a better legal formula.
And when we have, in the future going forward, there would be opportunity to consider the representation, for example, and it would have to go back to voters the way we wrote our article. But for example, if we ever wanted to have at-large voting in some way, or some hybrid where you have local and at-large, we rejected that idea initially. But do you want to speak to that?
Another formula that we could have used is to have a set board size, say 12, and then have those 12 people elected from everyone in the entire consolidated district. Based in part on those reasons, we rejected that. There's several hybrids to that as well. We rejected that. If the board and the voters want to revisit that in 5, 15, 25, 35 years, they're welcome to do that.
But also, just answering the second part of that question, how many times do we have issues that are on our CSSU board, which are then also on our individual boards? And, that's the definition of, consolidating governance, where we can have one conversation and not have to wait for another board to decide in order for the overall board to make a decision. So that's a great help and will reduce the complexity.
Stacy and then Kathy.
I agree with you, but I think the one place where it gets kind of tricky is when you're discussing major improvements to buildings and whatnot. I think that's going to become a little tricky. And I think,
And we want to address that tonight.
And I think to compare the CPU board is not quite apples and apples. It's one building with all of the students getting the same benefit. So with having 4 or 5 or how many buildings there are, I think it's not quite the same, but I think ultimately where you landed is probably the best place to land.
So let's address the facilities question, because that's one question that comes up a lot. Who wants to take that?
Well, what specifically?
I think
Let's say there's a
specifically to
need for
capital.
facilities improvements in one town.
So at the moment, we each have a facilities committee in each building in our town. And when we need a large project done, we go for a bond in our town. If you're consolidated, you have one facilities committee that's looking at all the buildings all at once. I would expect that if projects came up that were large enough to require a bond, it wouldn't just be in one town, it would be looking at all the buildings at once. So there would probably be multiple projects that would then get underneath one bond that would spread it out that way, if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and then theoretically, as a consolidated board, you can start to look across all of your building needs and come up with a long-term plan where perhaps you're bonding, this is just me speaking, this isn't like what we would do, but you could say, well, we could bond a smaller amount more often to keep up with the facilities, do it the right way, to be thoughtful about it, instead of, building up over time a large bond you need to service a single building to take care of larger problems. So there are some opportunities there too.
And that's how we looked at some models around the state that already are, like Burlington, for example, because you do look at all your buildings and prioritize. Because really, it would be hard to get all 4 towns to vote on a Heinsberg bond, right? I mean, that would be difficult. So it's the only way to survive. But it would be bringing all your best people together. And the other thing, just because it is on the local voice, and I'm sorry, this gentleman's point about bandwidth, you would need to have people, local community principal, driven committees to keep an eye on the local school. I mean, we really don't want generic cookie cutter schools. We want vibrant, unique schools, equity, but vibrant, unique schools. And that's going to really rely on strong community involvement.
Local voice.
Can you explain how the boards are going to function during the transition phase?
Yeah. Who wants to take that one? Anyone want to jump in? Russ.
Way to volunteer. The local boards are going to continue to function just as they are today. With this taking effect, if it passes, July 1st, 2017, there will be a point where the local boards are not going to be preparing a budget, where that is going to be handled by the new school district board, and that board and the existing boards will kind of operate in parallel for about a 1-year period. The election for new board members would be at the same time as the vote to, pass or not the Act 46.
So the new board members then become active once they're voted in, like June something?
So,
Secretary of Education
Colleen.
meets with that group, and that's the organizational meeting. And then
July
they
1,
start to-
2016.
yeah, so another way to think of it is that your town's already voted a budget that gets you through this next fiscal year. Your current local board will administer that budget. Come the end of this next year, like October, November, December timeframe, the new board will sit down and start crafting the budget for the new consolidated district, Your old board won't. They'll be like, yay, I don't have to deal with that. And the new board then takes over and then puts that out for a vote across the new consolidated district to fund that year starting in 2017. And then your local board will then dissolve.
And then one more question about
Sure.
that new board. Is there going to be any kind of consulting help for the new board to get it up and running and
Yes.
functioning?
And I've used the term policy governance a number of times. The idea is that a consolidated board, because it's fewer people, you have these multiple towns. We use policy a lot now, and it's really, we need to work with all of our boards who are currently sitting to come up with what makes sense for a new consolidated board. This team here is not adopting policy for a consolidated board. It would be up to those who are elected, but we have a strong, as you know, policy system in place, and we would continue to work with that. Is that what you're, Amanda and then Joan? I'll repeat.
Two questions. The first is, what will the new budget process look like? Will there be local meetings and then meetings that are more together, maybe here at CVU? Because I know there's people have expressed concerns about having to come to CVU instead of being able to do things locally. And then the second question is, so let's say we try this out and it doesn't necessarily work. Can you consolidate, for lack of a better term?
Let me take the first question because it's easy. Who wants to take it? New budget process. Do you want to, or
Kelly, you want to take it?
I think the short answer is yes. There's going to be local input at each local school, probably coordinated by the principal. And each building principal will formulate a process that he or she thinks is best.
Will it be similar to like how you have local meetings with budget buddies at that level? Or are you just going to do formal meetings here with budget buddies, or is this still to be determined?
I would say, for the most part, it's still to be determined, but that local input is very important to us as a committee and to the new board, so that, let's just say, it will be highly encouraged to maintain some type of process to allow for that local input. I think it will look different in each of our constituent towns.
just based on past practice, you can't throw that
Right.
away.
If I get, Keith said there are some things that are still to be determined. I think as a committee, one of the things we tried not to do was to make decisions that are rightfully going to be the responsibility of that new board. So, what the budget process is going to look like, they'll have to figure that out, at least in some measure. It wasn't ours to make that determination.
But that's an important point, because if you put something in the articles that are submitted, that's a legal document, and as Russ alluded to, if you prescribe something in there and don't give them any flexibility, there's nothing they can do. So we left flexibility in order for the new board to work together and come and develop these types of.
And the state is very interested in this legislation with local voice, and so part of our paperwork that has gone to the state, there's, in the back pages of the report, you'll see pages specific to budget development recommendations, and then we have that in an additional document. But throughout all of this, we know that our recommendations to a future board will include things like using budget buddies, using forums at the local, in local spaces so that people have the opportunity to meet within their own communities, using principals to help guide some of the local discussion that happens within their own community, and that filters back up. So there'll all be mechanisms, and we've talked about whether or not we need to have a new board letter, what are the recommendations?
But one thing just to add on this, to be transparent here, there has to be equity between those individual budgets. So the overall board is going to have some umbrella decision-making, because it's one tax rate. So you can't have one school deciding that they want class sizes of 6 because someone else is going to pay for it, right? So there is going to be that kind of thing. The other thing is that part of freeing up the administrative talent to actually do education is to take some of that budget responsibility off. So particularly areas like maintenance and buses and, all the kind of things that are more infrastructure related could be done centrally without having to pull the principals in, which leaves the local input to the exciting things that involve kids. So.
And if I could just offer an example from this current past budget season, as you know, special education got moved to the central office, and Dave brought up on one of his slides that 2/3 of our $70 million budget right now are operating under centralized systems between CVU and CSSU budget. So we already have the experience of working with centralized budgeting. This past year, when we got our first baseline budget, the first pass through it, and always, first draft is the first draft, we saw special education was a little high, and we didn't want to go back to our locals and ask for special education assessments at the level that came through. And so we went back to our administrators and said, can you work with us? What happened is central office leadership working with building level leadership, they worked through their systems and figured out different ways to deliver high quality educational program for kids who are eligible with special education, and they came back with a $300,000 savings, which is approximately 2% of that budget. So if we can work those same mechanisms in other parts of the budget, it's promising. So there's always going to be the local discussion, and I would say that we probably want to have. I'm waiting for the question about local innovation, also. But I want to get back to your other question, Amanda. Who wants to take the one? We don't like it in 2 years, can we?
I think the simple answer to that one is no. Is it possible? Yeah, but it would have to go back to a vote by all the voters of that then consolidated district. And keep in mind what Dave said, is that in 2019, the Agency of Education and the Board of Education get a say-so as to who's going to be consolidated or not. So hypothetically, that would continue into the future. So if 2029, we decided we don't want to be consolidated anymore, they might have something to say about that.
Joan?
Well, to that point, there may have to be a payback of the 10 cents, 8 cents. I don't know that, but that would be part of the contract. So that
There's the legislator in the room.
There's more than one.
The other thing I was going to ask is, do you imagine that the 34 members going down to 12 members, some might want to run, but there might be some new folks who are excited about this opportunity. So at some point, we would probably explain how to run and how to get your petitions and all that to have a place at the table, balance of continuity, maybe new, maybe, I don't know, but just to raise that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So one of the things we're going to do is we have our next CSSU and all local board carousel on 26th of April. And we've carved out a period of time in there where current board members and the public can come in between 6:30 and 7 o'clock and get a download on all the information that they need in order to run for the board and what they need to do and how that would work. In the articles, we've set out how many terms of what particular length would need to happen, because you can't elect everybody for a 3-year term on the first time, because then you have to re-elect everybody 3 years later. And the elephant in the room is, anybody had a contested election in many, many years? You did have.
Amanda's our one.
Yeah. We've had 34 board members. I've been a board member and run 3 times and never had a contested election. It's no reason to consolidate the board, but it's let's get come down to a critical size where it's manageable. We can get good conversations. I remember the first time I ran. You remember this meeting, and I took it the wrong way initially, but now that I've been on the board, the outgoing member of my board said, in 11 years, and I only ran contested once. And, we need more contested election, and I was running open, and I was like, well, what's wrong with me, But what really would happen there is you would have conversations, conversations like this where you would discuss different options and you would talk to different points of view, and people would be able to decide, wow, that's maybe this person or that option is better for the CSSU. So, long-winded example, way too much about me that you wanted to know. But again, on the 26th, between 6:30 and 7, we always run late, so it'll probably be like 6:40 to 7:15, but an opportunity to learn about how to be a board member in the new.
We'll also post things like in front porch forum.
Right. And it will be on RETN. And if you go to RETN that night, look at the agenda, you can click on that item on the agenda. So if you can't make it to the meeting, you can just look at it later, click, and just see that portion of the agenda to see exactly what was discussed.
Thank you. Jim McCullough from Williston. On it, I'm thrilled that the board here chose options for students over cash. And it's pretty clear to me that that is in fact the effect here. I'm curious, however, about the what's the outcomes for our teachers.
So
how does that play out with the budget years
and
contracts, negotiations, and so on?
Well, they're under contract right now, so the contract is, the teachers are up for renegotiation in the next year, and it would be up to a consolidated board to take on that.
And it's
Right.
one contract.
And we have one contract.
We have one contract.
Currently, we have one contract.
Yeah, we
currently
Right.
Not different towns expiring in different years. There you have it.
Support staff, one contract.
I know, we're like in our 12th year.
Yeah, it's been a
Right.
It's been a long time. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, totally, thank you.
But what it would allow, with the blurry lines between the towns, it would allow, for example, someone to do a sabbatical in another town and then come back.
Same way as the students can move.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, another example, that I like to give is, say a school wants an orchestra but can't afford to have a full-time orchestra, coordinator, teacher, lesson, but another school wants a partial orchestra teacher. So you can look at areas in individual budgets that have needs for partial things. And if you find that, we're not going to force people to move to different schools, but if you find a teacher that it's a great opportunity for them, it gives them an opportunity to do something on different schools, you can capitalize on our, pooled together budget and the blurred lines to offer many opportunities to many schools. I look at CVU, you have a larger population, you have a broad array of programs that are here. I mean, could we teach economics in Shelburne? We could, but we don't have a budget to do it. But you get up into CVU, you have a larger population, you can get a critical population in order to teach that. And that's why they have different subjects at the higher levels, aside from the obvious that they're older. But those are the examples of opportunities that are great for teachers to teach what they like to teach over different areas. Yeah.
To do a reduction in force, and there was an opening in Williston. We've already put money in training that teacher in Charlotte, and they would then just be moved to Williston. Or so there'd be actually more security in that way. And we've already invested in them because they've been in the district.
Good point. Probably maintaining seniority at the same time.
And those would be part of the negotiating contract as well. We've already done that with special education. Everyone gets one color paycheck from central office if they work for special education. And so there's the opportunity to build on what we learned through that. Back here, and then Kathy.
Regarding standardization of curriculum and tools for teaching.
Yep. Standardization of curriculum and tools for teaching. I'm going to turn to our superintendent to talk about curriculum.
So
If you
curriculum-
remind what you do now.
Right, so in Chittenden South, curriculum already is a function of the SU board. We coordinate curriculum through, we have a curriculum, actually we call him the Director of Innovations, and I've just, anyway.
Curriculum instruction and assessment.
Yeah,
Yes.
no. So he coordinates that work. We have people in each of the schools that work, and whether it's literacy, math, right now we've been doing something with new generation science standards. Our teachers meet across the SU when we're doing professional development around any one of those areas. Our curriculum at this point, I can say, in every one of our schools is vertically aligned. So that K-12, when our kids get to CVU, we can say, hands in the fire, your kids, regardless of which school they're in, they're getting all of the same opportunities and learning experiences, whether you're in Shelburne, Charlotte, Heinsberg, or Williston. So that's already coordinated at the SU.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, if I could add to that, so responsibility for curriculum resides in the central office as a result of state law. But even before that, because that wasn't passed, what, 4 or 5 years ago, somewhere in that range, even before that, the K-8 districts in this supervisory union worked very hard to align their curriculum so that kids from Williston and kids from Charlotte ended up at CVU equally prepared for the classes that they were going to be faced there. That if you didn't have coordinated curriculums, and my understanding is this is kind of how it was once upon a time, they didn't all necessarily arrive at CVU equally prepared for what they were going to be facing there. So it's something that's been going on a long time in the supervisory union, but it is also state law now that responsibility resides at the SU level.
Do you have another question? Oh, okay. A new voice, thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one has been partially answered, but I wonder if you could speak again about the additional freed up time that principals will have through consolidation, what tasks go away so that the principals have more time for instructional leadership and other things.
And your second question, or you want to?
My second question is, I just want to revisit the issue of, you've spoken to the idea of, and have worked on the need to maintain a local voice, but I may just not be comprehending this, but I think of local school boards as a very visible vehicle for parents and for community members to be able to show interest and concern for their schools. And when that local board, if you don't have a regular standing meeting each month of a local group of people who are focused not just on budgetary concerns, but there's all kinds of things going on in schools. I'm thinking about how does that need get met? I think in those districts already where we have union high schools, for example, I just think the reality, there's no getting around it, is that there's some separation of the union school from the town sometimes in terms of participation. And so I don't know if through Act 46, if there's anything that prohibits there being some sort of formalized standing committee that can still meet on a regular basis and engage with the community and with parents, or if that formalization has to go away and all be centered on the supervisory union district board.
Okay, I'm going to start backwards with responses to your questions as far as, and then turn to our superintendent, because I think that your two questions are somewhat related. What's the role of the instructional leader? How does the principal change? How is their work differently? And then your interest in local voice issues. I just want to dispel the idea that there's going to be a second tier of elections that occur for that local voice piece. Like, we're not going to have a new set of boards that have some authority like our current school district boards. How that happens locally, that voice and that interplay. It's, first of all, responsibility of a consolidated board to ensure that there are mechanisms, but then there are also going to be things that happen at the local level. But let's talk about the role of the principal, if we can, a little bit, as far as...
So I think the obvious things that would go away would be buildings, buses, food service. Those are really the obvious ones that would go away. And then principals, I can tell you, if they were here, would tell you, what they really want to do is they want to work with teachers. They want to be the instructional leader in the school. They want to spend time in that environment doing that, not chasing down the water pipe that just burst and that kind of thing. And there's a piece of it, and I want to be careful about this because I recognize there is an important piece to the second part of your question. There is a piece that we need to take away some of the board connection. Part of that board connection with the principal really takes away from the principal's ability to be working with teachers, with kids, with families. At the same time, we do need to figure that out, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the Articles of Agreement, they were very general about it, but they talked about the new board needs to figure out what is that structure going to be that is going to allow for exactly what you're talking about. One of the things that we've done in Chittenden South in the last maybe 5 years is developed a kind of a cycle for presentations to boards. So on a 3-year cycle, boards get presentations from the school people. This particular cycle happens to be around co-curricular and extracurricular activities. So every month, there's a half an hour on the board schedule, on the board agenda that is around that. So at the end of the year, the board feels pretty smart about like what it is that's going on in that school. Another cycle is around academic programming. Another one is about student supports. Well, that piece of the agenda, I think that that's something that we could think about. Like, what would that look like if we figured out a way to do that with the local members from, for instance, we already carousel here. What if there were a meeting just before the board meeting where the 2 members from Charlotte met with the principal and a group of teachers around, whatever. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think that like a group of creative people, like the ones that sit right here, can figure that out and make sure, because what I can tell you is we all do value that. We all know that one of the reasons we have really great schools is because we have really engaged communities.
Kevin?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to present a different viewpoint on a comment you made about your feeling that there might be like a disconnection locally with the loss of the local boards. I actually feel like when we consolidate, and I can only speak from, I'm on the Williston board, and I can tell you in Williston, there's 5 members on the local school board and another 4 that are on the CVU board. So Williston's actually represented by 9 people. In a sense, that can be confusing to our constituency. Who do you talk to when you've got a problem? You got 9 choices. Not a bad thing. You probably know one of them. You can get to them, but that that can sometimes dilute your issue as it goes into these other boards. I think it's going to be helpful for communities to know that they're going to have, in Williston's case now, 4 people who are approachable, dedicated, involved, and directly making those decisions in that forum. And to me, I think that's going to be, I actually just think it's going to be a better representation for the local community.
So I'm thinking, we're talking about policy governance, and I think
that's
really
the other
important
change.
because the board is going to be setting policy. It is going to be up to the school districts to determine how that policy is going to look in that school.
A school administration.
Right. So I mean, and so when you were saying about, if somebody has a problem, I would hope they aren't going to go to the board, they're going to go to the principal.
Right.
And the
Right.
program council, which is a part of every school that involves leaders, teacher leaders from the schools to answer those solutions or those problems and develop solutions, right?
I think the nature of the relationship is going to change.
Yes.
And for the better.
And let's not forget about the parent groups in this whole process.
Which are
Some of whom are here.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no expectation or hope that they change. That we still need to have those dedicated, involved parents speaking to their school.
And on that note, I was remiss in not thanking our high representative from Heinsberg,
Carla.
Carla
Weetrick.
PIE.
PIE, oh, Partnership in Education.
Carla Weetrick brought food for us tonight.
Oh, and
so
so-
we're going to leave, we're going to stand around and have some conversation. And Amanda from Williston contributed as well. So thank you. So we do have 2 representatives from active parent-teacher organizations.
Our Shelburne team is actually having a meeting right now.
Yeah, but we did tonight, we couldn't come up with a night when there was not something going on in CSSU. I know there's a second grade concert in Shelburne tonight, and a basketball game.
Going on,
There's
cafeteria,
something
yeah.
going on.
Auditorium.
Let's do 1 or 2 more questions, and then I would recommend that we have an informal conversation.
I just wanted to add one other thing to your observation about how high schools in a union high school you might feel a little more disconnected than a local. And we discussed that too on the board, the dynamic between parents and local voice K-8 versus this, in a high school setting. And our finding kind of was parents are so involved, K-8, but once the children get into high school, you're not really in the school system as much because the children themselves are more independent. The same way you might be for your 2nd grader, your 3rd grader, your 4th grader. So that was just an observation we made because we thought that too, that, oh, but when you get to the high school, it seems like it's a disconnect.
And it may be a part of the development.
Yeah, it's not really an answer, but I just wanted to let you know we thought about that as well.
So are there other committee members who haven't had a chance to speak to any of the issues tonight? I just want to make sure that you all have an opportunity. How about we'll do 1 more question from someone we haven't heard, and then 1 more question, and then we'll break for informal conversation. Please.
What happens to local community access to their local school? You know, I think about the recreation leagues, the town informal basketball pickup games that go on.
Stays the same.
But
So
now
for
that
most
it's
people
not
in a
owned by the town
consolidated
anymore.
system, no one would see a change initially.
Well, actually, so Debbie, it's not owned by the town anymore, but it's technically owned by the Charlotte School District now. So it's, when recreation comes to us, they already have to come to the school to schedule and to get it, so that part really won't
So
change at
there's
all.
not going to be suddenly like fees, usage fees or rental
We
rates
tried
that
that,
we would
didn't
normally
we?
pay? Thank you.
We have a policy. It would be a policy driven.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a policy on facilities use, and it would be that way. I know in Heinford, we're excited about getting another basketball court, right? Oh, another gym.
That joke.
Benchmark. So let's say that we look like this is something that we have to do sooner or later. So now benchmark, so how we know how successful that will be 6 months and 1 year down the road. I mean, let's say pick the budget, pick the $1.5 million, how would we know how close we are getting to it, or maybe not? Because I know that your model is based on a crystal ball as clear as mine, so that you know, we can predict all the cost increase and things like that in the next 5 years, but I know we are not. So what happened like 2 years down the road, say, well, you know what? We're not seeing the 1.5.
That's a really good question, and I think it deserves a really thoughtful response. But that's a really good question.
Anytime there's great,
That's a great question.
Can I?
I'm not trying to be flippant, but you know, we haven't, you know, whenever you have a plan and you put a plan out, you want to have measurable outcomes, and
I mean, there's.
I think that we need to spend more time with that. I think that's a good example.
It's for the new board.
Yeah, but there are going to be absolutely measurable things coming out of this. There's going to be what your tax rate is, what your cost per pupil is, and you'll be able to look at that and see, like, is this going in the trend that we expect? And then if it is or it isn't, you make that decision. Okay, are there things we can do to change this needle and make it go the right way if it's not going the way we expected? And that, you know, it can be divided in money aspect in that sense. And then if you look at how are kids coming into CVU from these individual school buildings, all part of the same district. Has anything changed with consolidation that education is changing in each individual school building? That shouldn't happen, but we anticipate that, those are things that you can track and you can look at, and it's a line that Elaine has given me every time, and it's a line that I love to repeat to other people, and that there are kids showing up at CVU, as part of a trend and falling down because their particular school didn't educate them properly on the way in. There's definite checks and balances. I may have misquoted you, but what I'm trying to say is that I did not quote you, that was a paraphrase, but I'm just saying there's definite ways where you can watch kids going in, watch kids coming out, and we can track data, and we can track money on each individual budget, and people are going to hold us accountable to that, and that's what we're going to be looking for.
I mean, I'm really supporting for two reasons. I want kids to have more and better opportunities and better outcomes. And I would like the tax rate to go down. But, I think the more and better opportunities, if you can't point to more and better opportunities for kids, then this is just getting rid of school board members. You really need to be able to say. And the only other thing that's really important is the only other thing is to make sure that the community support of our schools. Right now, we have really strong community support of our schools, and the local voice piece of it is just a way of saying we can't function as an outstanding school district without the support of all of our communities, and we need to make that strong and keep it strong. So that would be the other thing.
And I think too, and I would just add to Jean that my support of it for the children, but also to keep local voice. I don't want the Secretary of Education to glomp us in with the rest of the state of Vermont. Chittenden South Supervisory Union is in a great spot in comparison to our neighbors as far as what we have as a cooperative relationship thus far among our communities. And you can just sit on the floor of the House and listen to the debates to know that we are just very fortunate that we are in this position to be having these kinds of discussions.
And we've worked hard to get
Yes.
So I guess in a way I'm piggybacking on what you're saying, but I mean, it's not lost on me, and I just want to underscore it to you guys, like the 12 people here, including the 2 that are up there, they represent what this new board would look like. Maybe it'll be a different face, but this is what the new board would look like. There are 4 Williston, 3 Shelburne, 2 Heinsberg, 2 Charlotte, and unless you're and 1 St. George, and unless you're from one of those towns, I bet you wouldn't be able to guess which town any one of these board members is from. Because what do they care about? Well, yes, but I mean, if you didn't have that, and they already do know. But the fact is, when people are having the conversations, and it's not just this group, it's also the CVU board. You go to a CVU board, I challenge anyone, unless they know the people, to know which town they're representing. Because they're not representing towns, they're representing kids and really excellent quality education.
I think that's probably a good note for us to end on. And I just want to reiterate something that Kate Webb said at our legislative breakfast a couple months ago. And she said our concept of what's local is expanding. So these are all of our kids. These are all of our buildings. All of our board members have the same interests at heart, regardless of what town they live in. And we all, all of us who've contributed, and everyone in this room, I really thank you for showing up tonight and contributing to this conversation. This is what makes this such a strong supervisory union, and we want to continue in that tradition, in that trajectory. So thanks to our Heinsberg and Williston PTO reps, PI and FAP. In shorthand, there are a few items to nibble on. If you want to have a conversation with any of us, we're going to be here for you to chat. So thank you, everyone.